Regional rankings. They weren't exactly rankings, but we get some ideas from what we got to see, and we're going to go over that and all 27 playoff races, inverting our order a little bit here. Crunch time coming up later tonight, but we wanted to talk to you about playoffs. Yes, playoffs here on In the Huddle. You still about belong to that, don't you, after all these weeks?
Yeah, it's catchy. It's a catchy little tune, man.
A little dubstep of our original one from a few years ago. Anyway, we're not here to talk about our musical choices here or our lead-in songs. We are here to talk about playoffs. Again, how we got here. Yep, how we got here is coming up on Crunch Time. A little bit later on tonight, we're going to let this one breathe for a little while before we do present that, and you'll have that to live by Thursday, Friday, before our preview show, and then we will be doing our D3 Blitzer show on Saturday, taking you around the important games that we kind of have an idea of from these playoff races and these regional rankings. You saw the alphabeticals here. We'll call them alphabeticals instead of rankings, I guess. JB, what struck you
it's a
here?
list.
Yes, it's a list. It's something.
Yeah,
but what struck you here of these 46 teams versus the 40 we used to get that are ranked?
Well, the biggest thing I noticed was that Susquehanna wasn't on the list in Region 2. That, to me, was kind of the biggest surprise. I think the fact that Rose-Hulman and Greenville, who are respectively looking like they're the leaders, potential Pool A qualifiers for the Heartland and the UMAC, respectively, them not being on there, maybe not so big a surprise. But Susquehanna being left off, kind of interesting, but I don't know, maybe it's just one of those deals where they just felt like they wanted to keep the conference representation sort of even. I don't know. Region 1 with Del Valle at the top, they would have been number one in Region 1, even if they didn't have the first thing that popped up in the alphabet. And the rest of the teams on there, it's interesting to see, no Western New England, even though they have a possibility of still getting in through the Pool A, although it's going to be a long shot with some of the tiebreaker situations. But a couple more MAC teams than I thought maybe. But Lycoming and Widener play this weekend, so that'll kind of take care of that in one way or another. And then elsewhere,
instead of just picking and choosing here, why don't we actually go through them one by one, and that way folks will get to see. Yeah, we got graphics. We brought graphics with us here this week, folks.
You brought graphics?
Yes. All right. What do you think took so long? Do you think I'm late by nature with everything I do in life? No, we've got graphics, JB. And here they are. First off, the Region 1 regional rankings. A little tough to see sometimes if you're on a smaller screen here, but we'll work with you. We took these right from the NCAA website, so blame them. Delaware Valley, Endicott, Framingham State. So let's look at it this way. Delaware Valley, the leader of the MAC. Endicott, one of the leaders of the CCC. Framingham State, the leader of the MASCAC. Husson, one of the leaders of the CCC. Lycoming, the second, I guess de facto second place team with Widener in the MAC. And this gives you an indication that the committee feels that the real strength lays in the MAC when it comes to Region 1. They're putting two lost teams in there, and a bulk of them from the same conference. Yep. And that gives you an indication of how they view subjective schedule strength in this situation. Also, Merchant Marine, the technical leader, one of the leaders in the new MAC. You can't put Springfield there because of the number of losses they have, which is 3, and Catholic was beaten by Merchant Marine, so that's why that's happening. And Johns Hopkins. I see. I can't even read it. It's so small in some cases here. Salve Regina, one of the leaders in the CCC is there. And as you pointed out, no Western New England, but we have 3 CCC teams there because there's just no way you could break that tie. And I think their hands were forced to place 3 out of the 4 teams there. Not sure why Western New England gets the worst of the bullet on that one, but I'm sure they have their reasons. So, Region 1, let's take a gander here, or a guess here as to what to expect. If you were doing rankings numerically, you said Del Val number 1. Who do you think's number 2 in that list of Region 1 folks?
Yeah, that's a tough call because I think you could make the case for a Pool A type of team like a Framingham because of the fact that they're in a pretty good position. They win this weekend and they pretty much clinch. But maybe Salve because they have the 8-1 record and they have the head-to-head over Endicott, who has that extra loss to Catholic. So from a pure numbers standpoint, I would have to say Salve would be my number 2. The winner, Lyco is 5-1 in the MAC. They've lost to Del Val, and they had a loss to Susquehanna in week 1. I would probably rank them maybe 3rd. Maybe Framingham would be 3rd in that case, or Merchant Marine. But we know that Merchant Marine's kind of in a bit of a tenuous position right now, that there's a chance that they may not win the new MAC. And I don't know if they have a strong enough resume otherwise that they would even get on the table for Pool C. But if they were 8, maybe the fact they're on this list, and if they finish the year 8-1, they might. Maybe.
Here's my answer. I think Merchant Marine currently is the number 2 team based on the fact their schedule strength is 512. Salve Regina's is woeful comparatively at 481 currently, which is 151st in the division. So Merchant Marine has a slightly better one, or not slightly, actually, a meaningfully better one above 500. So I think that does put them into that position. The problem for Merchant Marine is their remaining game is against Coast Guard. That will drop. Salve, on the other hand, if I get over to their schedule remaining here,
they play Husson on Saturday, and then they're done, and that's it.
So they will get an improvement, probably right around 500. So it's possible Salve's and Merchant Marine's regional rankings will cross over by the time this is all said and done in week 11, but it's going to be a little tenuous right now for Salve to really have much say in being a highly ranked team until that schedule strength gets up there. But they have to beat Husson.
Yeah,
that's
and
for sure.
We've already seen, there's a precedent with a 9-1 WPI team that didn't even get a look when they finished in the new MAC and kind of lost out in that tiebreaker a couple of years ago. So there's going to be a 9-1 team probably in New England, maybe more than one, that doesn't make the field.
Endicott would have rights to be the number 2 with a very, very good schedule strength here. I just saw it was in the 40s in terms of ranking. I've got to pop it back up on my screen, but it was very good.
It's 41.
Which is 553. That's extraordinary. Now, granted, they still have a couple games that will affect it, but because they lost head-to-head to Salve Regina, you can't really do much putting them there. So I think the order becomes Merchant Marine, Salve Regina.
Actually, Endicott only has one game, Frank. Endicott has a bye this week, and then they wrap up the regular season. So
interesting. A lot of their conference is having this situation because Salve and Endicott are both at 9 games right now. So they're going to take their bye in week 11, basically.
Bring back the conference championship game like the old NEFC.
Yeah, well, good point. But that's Region 1. We'll talk about the grand scheme of things, what it all means in a little bit. But let's go over to Region 2. And Region 2 looks like this. We have Ithaca, Johns Hopkins, Muhlenberg. So Ithaca, a leader with the Union in here in the Liberty League. Johns Hopkins and Muhlenberg in the Centennial Conference. As you pointed out, Susquehanna is missing here. Rensselaer, or RPI as we love to call them, also with Ithaca and Union here, I should point out. Salisbury all alone from the NJAC, and Washington and Jefferson all alone from the PAC. I'm a little bit interested into your thought as to why Westminster would be missing here when their only loss aside from Carnegie Mellon is to Mount Union, but then where's Carnegie Mellon at the same time? It seems like Region 2 is not putting much faith or backing behind the pack right now.
They're not putting the backing behind anybody who has more than one loss. There's no Hobart on there. There's no Carnegie Mellon. Basically it looks like in Region 2, unless you have a goose egg or one after your record, you're not going to make this super hyper competitive board. Now the irony is that W&J could finish 9-1 and still lose out on the Pool A if Westminster can win the rest of their games, and so they would effectively end up getting in a Pool A as like a 8-2 overall record, and the 9-1 runner-up or tiebreaker, loss out team would be at the mercy of the committee. Now, I'm of the opinion that W&J is probably the only one. There's two situations I see in Region 2 of an at-large pick coming in. Washington and Jay, if they can win out, so beat Carnegie Mellon this weekend, and I think their last game is against Waynesburg or somebody that they should be able to handle. They need John Carroll to beat Baldwin Wallace to effectively improve John Carroll's bump up, record overall, which will bump up W&J and effectively end the Pool C bid. Exactly. So it's a 1-2 thing. So if you're a President's fan, you need to win this weekend, and you need John Carroll to beat Baldwin Wallace in Week 11 to make the field.
Also, you need to root for Union over Ithaca, because there is a scenario whereby Ithaca is a Pool C contender. True. If Union beats Ithaca and RPI beats Union, or if Ithaca beats Union, and RPI beats Union the next week, RPI is the Pool A champ in the Liberty League. In Ithaca, if they beat Cortland, would finish 9-1 outside. And so they are probably the best resume out there. Again, if we look at strength of schedule, Ithaca has the 18th strength of schedule in the entire division at 575. That's compared to Union's. Wow. Well, of course, Union, it doesn't pop up right because it goes to Mount Union first. So give me a moment here, and I'll tell you that Union's is number 132 with a 489, but that is destined to rise with its last two games. And RPI's is 123 at a 494. So not great either, but also still with some room to grow because of what they've got left. So long story short, as you said, W&J needs to root for Union this weekend to get rid of Ithaca from the Pool C race, and needs to root for John Carroll over Baldwin Wallace. Those are two things that would help it. Also, root for
and Westminster to trip up.
Yeah, root somehow for the idea of, not Carnegie Mellon, but Westminster to lose a game here between now and the end of the season. Because if I remember correctly, are we at a three-way tie
Yeah, it is a three-way tie. And fortunately for the Titans, they have the easiest schedule out of the three for the remainder of the go. I mean, all due respect, I believe that they're taking on St. Vincent, and then I guess Geneva maybe, which actually is not necessarily a pushover.
Yeah, really.
But they're not playing. They're not playing the top of the conference from what I can recall. So let's see here. What do we got going on in the pack here? So
we'll get to their playoff race in a little bit, and we'll look at that more in depth there. So we'll look at the
St.
pack
Vincent
itself.
And then they wrap up with Geneva at home. So both winnable games for the Titans, in my opinion.
Region 3, we'll take a look. Only 7 teams ranked here. Birmingham Southern and Trinity, both at 7-0 in division. And those are SAA teams, but Center also ranked at 6-2. I don't think this is a sign of this idea that the SAA is the end-all, be-all, but because there are just so few teams and conferences in Region 3, I think that's what's going on.
I think that's true. When you look a little closer at Center, Frank, they have a win over Trine, which is we'll see on the next slide, and they also beat Hanover, who is still technically in contention in the Heartland. So Their out of conference wins were actually pretty strong ones. So that might be bolstering them. And they only lost to, I think, Trinity and by a couple of touchdowns. So it's not like they were completely blown out in that. So it makes sense, based on that resume, that they could squeak in here.
Hardin-Simmons and Mary Hard-Baylor are only teams from the ASC in here. And then Randolph-Macon and Washington and Lee are the teams from the ODAC. Now remember, Washington and Lee has beaten both Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney. So if you're looking at this list, you've got to assume that Mary Hardin-Baylor is number 1 here. And number 2, I think, is going to be the winner of Birmingham Southern Trinity, essentially. So right now they're kind of 2A and 2B, if you had to think of it that way. And I would
what's actually interesting to me, Frank?
What's that?
Huntington's not on this list. And they're in line to potentially win the USA South. I mean, they have the same overall record as Center, and they're gonna make the playoffs. And they gave Oshkosh a good run for their money. I know they lost pretty lopsided fashion to Birmingham Southern, but I just kind of realized, like, and
their strength of schedule is 515, which is 92nd. It's not like it's horrible. Let me check Centers real quick as you say that. Centers is number 36. Centers. That's why. Number 36, well, 555. Okay. So that's why they're valuing it so much more with Center there and the other things you pointed out. So I got to think Hardin-Simmons is kind of the team after the SAA leader. And then from there, it's a crapshoot who's who and what's what underneath Hardin-Simmons in Region 3. My point here is going to be that aside from the loser of Trinity and Birmingham Southern and Hardin-Simmons, if they win out, that's the Pool C discussion. There is no further Pool C discussion to be had in Region 3 that we can find right now.
Yeah.
So, Region 4, Mount Union holding on the other day saved a lot of problems for Region 4, which is already problem-ridden in terms of undefeated teams. As we've pointed out, DePauw is considered an in-division undefeated team, and so you'll see them here, but we'll go through it here. Albion in the MIAA, and that is it from the MIAA right now, even though there is a multi-layer tie that could be possible there. Hope is there too. Hope. I'm sorry, you're right. Missed it underneath Heidelberg. So Albion and Hope, but no Trine showing up there, interestingly, after Albion beat Trine. Baldwin Wallace, John Carroll, and Mount Union. So you're seeing where they're placing, in Heidelberg, they're placing the class of the entire conference in the OAC. They have placed 4 teams out of 7 from the same conference. That is the most representation for any conference in any set of regional rankings. There's only 7 teams in this one. And DePauw from the NCAC in there as well. That might give you some indication of how they view a team like Baldwin Wallace here. So you've got to think that the ordering is Mount Union, Baldwin Wallace, DePauw, and go from there basically with probably John Carroll and Heidelberg.
We'll find out. Yeah, we'll find out this weekend when John Carroll plays Heidelberg. One of those teams won't be on this list next week.
Good point. So we'll see where they go with it. But it is a weird anomaly to see 4 teams from the same conference in a regional ranking set. That never used to happen when we used to have the more master sets. And now, I guess because we're more concentrated, it's possible. Let's go to Region 5. Yeah. In the NAC, it's Aurora and Lakeland both showing up here. In the ARC, it's Central and Co. both showing up here, interestingly enough. In the NWC, it's both Lake Forest and Chicago showing up in this list. And in the CCIW, it's both North Central and Wheaton in this list. I guess I'm not surprised, per se, that they're handling it in this way. 2 per conference that's represented in Region 5. Yeah. But
pretty much,
I'll tell you, to see Co there at 6-2, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I guess looking at their strength of schedule, there's only a 111 ranking, 505 in the actual strength number.
That's not great.
Not fascinating. So I guess there's just a lack of teams to put in here. And Aurora is there because they're leading the NAC ultimately and have a good strength of schedule a subjective one at
I
least.
see. Well, one of the things that's boosting Frank, is that they actually have a win over a regionally ranked opponent, and they beat Hope 28-21 back in week 2. So maybe that's the boost that's keeping them in there. I mean, they lost to Wartburg and to Central, and Central beat them pretty soundly, but they must have decided to, kind of, as you said, to balance things out. And that win over Hope is a solid win, because Hope is probably a strong Pool A candidate, and that will certainly help them.
Yeah. So looking at Region 5, though, also remember that Lake Forest still takes on Chicago. North Central and Wheaton have already played each other. Aurora and Lakeland will play each other this week. And as you said, Central and Co. have played each other. So only a couple teams will be forced out of this context, possibly, depending on how they're ranked, because we don't know the numerical rankings. So a loss doesn't guarantee you're out of these, but we can guess a couple of these what the loss are.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, just based on kind of what we know, if you had to rank order this, obviously the defending champs North Central is number 1. Central would be number 2 with a 8-0 overall record, and then you could argue that Wheaton could be number 3, even ahead of an undefeated Lake Forest, just based on their historical strength, and even I would say you could place Aurora perhaps above the NWC leaders right now, just based on who they've played. That narrow loss to St. John's, who's going to have a very strong ranking.
Lake Forest strength of schedule is 146th with a 483. Wheaton's is a 99th ranking. They're number 99 in the rankings, I should say, with a 512. So I would say that you are accurate, with at least subjectivity playing a role here, because Wheaton does have a loss against number 1 in Region 5. We'll call it that. We will assume North Central's number 1, and so they have that loss against them. So, yes, I agree with you that the rank order here does go something along the lines of North Central, then Wheaton, then Lake Forest, and then it's a crapshoot from there as to the rest of the 4 teams. Finally, Region 6, which proves out to be an interesting region when you look at it here. You have Bethel and St. John's as a representation from the MIAC, and those 2 teams will likely face off in the MIAC championship game in Week 11. You have Linfield and Whitworth is making an appearance after all that discussion we've been having at D3Football.com about Whitworth's rankability in a poll / in these rankings also. Redlands, the SCIAC representative, because they are leading the SCIAC and probably will win it. And 3 teams from Wisconsin, La Crosse, Oshkosh, and Whitewater. And much like the OAC reading we got from these rankings, you can see that the most favored child conference inside Region 6 is the WIAC, because a 2-loss Oshkosh team at only 4-2 in division is getting enough love to be one of the 8 teams in the Region 6 rankings. How do you rank this one if you had to right now?
Oh, boy. Probably Whitewater number 1, La Crosse number 2, St. John's 3, Linfield 4, which sounds kind of hard to believe, especially how good of a team Linfield is. And then maybe, Bethel and Redlands and something like that. I mean, part of the problem with Region 6 is just too loaded. There's a lot.
So here's the interesting thing. I will cut you off for 1 second. The strength of schedule works out like this. St. John's has the 6th best strength of schedule nationally at 611.
They might be a number 1 seed. That's what I said the last thing, Frank.
Hold on. Before you jump to conclusions here, Whitewater has the number 8 ranking at 604.
Jeez.
So basically a give or take tie, if you really look at it that way. So I would tell you that you probably are correct that Whitewater would be ranked ahead of St. John's based on performance in the 2019 playoffs, being the runner-up in the Stag Bowl, because I think it's minutia when you look at a 611 versus a 604. Whitewater also has the win against Oshkosh, although St. John's has wins against Aurora, ranked. and
Bethel, right?
ranked, but them. Whitewater also has a win against Salisbury, don't forget, ranked.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
yeah, well, I think we'll talk about it in our Friday show. We have to make picks on the Whitewater lacrosse game, but I think most people are of the mind that the Warhawks are the favorite in that, and again, they'll still have to play the game, but that win would certainly bump them up with yet another big win.
What's interesting is that Oshkosh gets ranked without Huntingdon being ranked.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Because they played each other in week 1.
Yeah. Yep. And it was a good game, too. It wasn't like
it was very close.
Yeah. And I think, going back to Whitworth, Frank, 67th overall in the strength of schedule. So, I think that Carnegie Mellon game that they had in week 1 is boosting them up.
And if Carnegie Mellon can get ranked by the end of this, it will really boost them up into some discussion for Pool C. Let's go conference by conference, look at who needs Pool C help and who is basically walking into the playoffs possibly this weekend. First, in Region 1, the tiebreaker analysis is in this 4-way tie that's going to probably end up being a 3-way tie somehow here. The Endicott has a strength of schedule advantage, but that could change, don't forget. So we're not going to guarantee anything here, but for now, CCC, it goes to strength of schedule if we have a 3-way unbreakable tie at 1 loss each. The ECFC has 4 teams locked right now. Let's see if I can name them off the top of my head. Anna Maria is 1.
Yep.
Castleton is 2. Gallaudet is 3. And is Dean 4?
Nope. SUNY Maritime, I believe.
Maritime is 4. Okay.
No, wait, no, sorry, my bad. I think it's actually Alfred State.
That's a good point. Yep, Alfred State is number 4.
My bad. Sorry, Pios.
We were basically going back and forth here on what the tiebreaker was, and I lost my notes on this, so I'm just going to go straight to it here. Tiebreaker for the ECFC is
to our friend Katie, the commissioner of the ECFC, Katie Boldich, actually, and she sent us
the. It will drop to overall winning percentage for all games against NCAA Division III opponents. That's where it would fall to because all other things would be unbreakable ties still. And if I jump over to the ECFC real quick. Let's take a look at the overall record to see who's got a slight edge there, as of right now at least. If we end up with that tie, Gallaudet would have the best record ultimately. Now, what's left to be played there between these teams? A little bit of round robin left. One of Castleton and Alfred State and one of Gallaudet Anna Maria will be eliminated. And so let's see. With Gallaudet Castleton also next week, the chances that a 3-way tie remains are low, I'll be honest with you, because there's enough carnage that should be going on here that somebody should be left at 1 loss or 2 teams would be left at 1 loss, and those are breakable ties. I don't think after this weekend you'll only have 2 teams tied. That's a guarantee because of what's left here with the round robin. So we'll see how that goes. MAC, it's Del Val. They could clinch this weekend, I believe, and Framingham State could clinch as well this weekend with wins. New MAC, Springfield, Merchant Marine, and Catholic. Now, don't forget here that Springfield and Catholic still play. Springfield also has MIT. Now, if somehow Springfield dropped 2 and Merchant Marine beat Coast Guard, they would win the New MAC. If if Merchant Marine dropped the game against Coast Guard and Springfield and Catholic had a tie, they play each other, don't forget. So it would be the winner of that game. And assuming it was a tie, it would most likely be Catholic beating Springfield and going. And Springfield is the only one without a loss on the road between these teams. It would remain the only one without a loss between these teams on the road. And that is the tiebreaker in the New MAC. After looking at it about 15 different times, The NUMAC's tiebreaker that matters is road record among tied teams. And their record for conference teams. So obviously their only loss would be against one of these teams. Their loss would be at home versus Catholic to force a three-way tie. So Springfield, USMMA, and Catholic all could still win the NUMAC. So who do you root for? Springfield, root for yourself, basically. But if you drop one along the way, you're going to have to root for Merchant Marine to essentially... to win.
The Secretary's Cup.
You need to secure. You need to win the Secretary's Cup to force the three-way tie, because remember, if Springfield loses to Catholic, they can still win the NUMAC if Merchant Marine forces the three-way tie.
Okay, gotcha.
So Catholic, what do you have to root for? Yourself, obviously, and also for Coast Guard. That's the one that needs to root for Coast Guard in the Secretary's Cup game. So Merchant Marine, who do you need to root for? Well, you need to root for basically MIT would help, matters immensely.
Yeah.
And then Catholic after that. So very tough for Merchant Marine to get in. I believe I can say with some level of positivity that if MIT were to lose to Springfield wins, that race for Merchant Marine is over. I don't see them getting into the playoffs based on the tiebreakers available at that point. So again, Merchant Marine needs MIT to beat Springfield this weekend, and then Catholic to beat Springfield in Week 11. Not impossible. And then Merchant Marine needs to beat Coast Guard in Week 11 in the Secretary's Cup game. How's that for convoluted? Wow. Region 2. In the Centennial Conference, we won't have an issue here because Susquehanna still plays Muhlenberg. So the likelihood is that we will not have a three-way tie. And then if Susquehanna wins, then Johns Hopkins would have the lead. If Muhlenberg wins, then Muhlenberg has the lead because they beat Hopkins earlier in the season. Cortland in the Empire 8 has clinched. In the Liberty League, Union has the lead, but it's still far from over as Ithaca plays Union this weekend, and then Union and RPI tussle in Week 11. Here's what we know. There will not be a three-way tie, and there will not be any two-loss necessity here. It will be a team that's either undefeated or with one loss winning the Liberty League. Who will it be? We don't know. If Ithaca loses this week, it comes down to Union, RPI, and the Dutchman Shoes game in Week 11. If Ithaca wins this weekend, then essentially, if RPI were to, if Union were to beat RPI, then Ithaca would win the conference. And there is technically, let's see here if I'm doing this correctly. If Ithaca beats Union, you can see we've really thought this out about 18 ways, and still can't get it right. If Union beats Ithaca, it's to the Dutchman Shoes game. If Ithaca beats Union, I believe that Union is eliminated because no matter what happens in the Dutchman Shoes game, if they beat RPI, Ithaca wins the tiebreaker head-to-head. If they lose to RPI, then RPI obviously and Ithaca are in a tiebreaker, one loss. So Union would be eliminated with a loss versus Ithaca from the Liberty League.
Interesting. Well, that just made the stakes of that game this weekend go up a lot.
Somebody, if you disagree with us, tweet at us right now if you're watching a live show. But we believe that is accurate here because, again, Union versus Ithaca. If Ithaca were to beat Union and put them at one loss, and Union beats RPI, the tiebreaker is a loss against Ithaca. And if they win, or if they lose rather to RPI in Week 11, well, they'll have two losses. They won't even be in a tiebreaker situation. And Ithaca plays Cortland in Week 11, so it's not a conference game. So that's that. Ithaca Union is an elimination game for Union. They could be eliminated. After having the best record to start in the conference. Go figure that one out for a second. In the NJAC, Salisbury to clinch. Go ahead.
Well, it's an elimination game for Ithaca too, because I think if you're if you have 2 losses, you're not going to get on the board in this situation.
True.
And even if you beat Cortland, I guess, and finish 8-2, the chances are pretty slim. If you pop the board back up, you were mentioning, Cortland has effectively clinched the Empire 8, and it seems like we have Salisbury pretty much as a lock in the NJAC. I think they can clinch this weekend as well. We'll get to the pack in a minute, which is another three-way situation. But to me, Frank, really the only other team that I could possibly see getting a serious Pool C look might be Johns Hopkins. If they can finish the season with just 1 loss, they'll be on the board. But basically, if you're a Hopkins fan, you want Muhlenberg to well, I guess if you're a Hopkins fan, you might want Susquehanna to beat Muhlenberg, actually.
Yeah, that's correct.
And if you're a Susquehanna fan, well, want your team to win. So,
yeah, of course. The pack. Let's go to the pack at this point. After kind of going back there, the game against Washington Jefferson Carnegie Mellon is one of the biggest games in the country for the reasons we've listed already. First off, it decides the pack more or less, depending on if Westminster is able to get through St. Vincent and Geneva. And W&J has Waynesburg, which should be an easy win in Week 11. This game decides, for all intents and purposes, just where we stand in the pack race. And if Carnegie Mellon were to win, they would get ranked, I believe, next week. And Whitworth would probably get some buoying in the Pool C race out west. So you want to talk about a game that's got effects across the country. That is it. Washington and Jefferson at Carnegie Mellon. If W&J wins, then it's Westminster with the lead, assuming they win out. If Carnegie Mellon wins, they lead the conference. And have who do they have at the end? Case Western Reserve in Week 11. So Westminster's hopes wouldn't be completely dashed if Carnegie Mellon were to win, because Case Western Reserve is no pushover. Every year that game in Week 11 goes down to the wire, no matter who these teams are in terms of Carnegie Mellon and Case Western Reserve. That's just one of the classic pack rivalry games every year. So fasten your seatbelts. The pack is going to get whack, to say the least. Back to that page real quick. You can see that representation right there. Let's move over to Region 3 and 4 at this point in the ASC. Mary Hardin Baylor, they basically need to win one of their last 2 games to clinch the ASC, since Howard Payne now has 2 losses. So even if Howard Payne beat them, it wouldn't be over against Mary Hardin Baylor. They would still technically have the lead. In the ODAC, Washington Lee has beaten both teams with 1 loss. They'd have to lose twice to lose the ODAC at this point. That's probably not going to happen, but we'll see. In the SAA, Birmingham Southern versus Trinity decides the conference for all intents and purposes here this weekend. In the USAC, the USA South, Huntingdon has a large enough lead here where if they win 1 out of 2, they win the conference. In the Heartland, you have a little bit of a merry-go-round forming there. Rose-Hulman, Mount St. Joseph, and Hanover. We were talking about this earlier. Where did we land on it? Is that a solvable tie ultimately, or did we suggest we might need a tiebreaker ultimately?
I think that was one where we did view it as a solvable tie, just based on, I think, who has played who so far. Because I think at this point, Rose-Hulman has a win over Hanover, and
Mount St. Joseph still plays both Hanover. MSJ still plays Hanover and RHIT, I said. And so you can't have a 3-way tie because Mount St. Joseph has both of those games left. So Mount St. Joseph probably is the one team that controls their own destiny aside from Rose-Hulman in the lead right now. Hanover needs help in this conference. And I believe they need a lot of help ultimately because they've lost to Rose-Hulman already, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that's right.
So they need a lot of help.
Same thing in the kind of the same deal in the MIA because you had Trine has just lost to Albion, so that I think that for all intents and purposes, I mean they're 3-1, and they play Hope in week 11, but geez, I think Albion. Let's see,
who do they have left?
Albion lost to Adrian, right? They have to play Hope. They have to play Hope this weekend. So that's another big. That's going to eliminate the chance of a 3-way tie, I should say.
And Trine plays Hope as well. Albion and Trine both play Hope, and so that will eliminate the 3-way tie possibility for the MIAA. Good point there. So we won't know for sure what's going on until week 11, most likely for these teams, unless. Now, even if Hope wins, unless Trine loses too this weekend.
We'll be keeping an eye. Part of our blitzer coverage. It's a 1:00 game, so we'll have our eyes in on the Britons against Hope and see what's going on there. Because if Hope wins, another Dutchman team, Frank, the Flying Dutchman of Hope, that would put them in a better position. But it's still kind of up in the air with that conference.
And also, we'll pay attention to that Trine game, too, because technically if they were to lose to Alma, which probably shouldn't happen, Hope could clinch technically if they win and Trine loses as well on week 10.
Yep.
DePaul, for all intents and purposes, in control of their own destiny, and strongly so. Would need to have to lose twice, I believe, to lose that. In the OAC, Mount Union, same situation. I might as well crown them now. It's a question of will Baldwin-Wallace get through as a good Pool C option ultimately. Let's go to Region 5, the ARC Central, basically virtually locked in right now in that conference. Win this weekend or some losses would get them there. In the CCIW, North Central, I believe, can clinch this weekend as well. Wheaton, obviously. Actually, North Central plays Washington University in week 11, don't they? Or is it week 10?
It's a good question. I think they play them. Let's see, Region 5.
I beat you to it, I think. It's North Central versus Wash U in week 10, so it's this weekend. So if North Central wins, that does give them the title. And Wheaton, obviously, sitting there saying, what are our Pool C hopes? They're good, but not great. I could see teams going in before Wheaton, and so I wouldn't guarantee them that they get picked early off the board, but I think they'll get picked nonetheless.
5-12 strength of schedule won't help, but they could end up being like the NCC of 2019, the quote unquote last team off the board, and we'll see where they end up.
Lake Forest needs to win out. They still have their game against Chicago in week 11, and from our research, the Midwest Conference has a very convoluted tiebreaker, something along the lines of quarters led again among the teams that are tied.
What?
Yes. Now, here's the problem. Let's back out to us for a second. I want to see your reaction to this when I tell you about this. Quarters led between tied teams. Guess what? In the conference, so you're going to match up the number of quarters led by each team inside conference games. Is the way I read into it. Okay. So guess what happened to Lake Forest earlier in the season?
They came from behind a bunch of times to win.
No, that wasn't that. They've had a pretty good track record this season. More like, I'm trying to get back to what week it was in the Midwest Conference. It was an early season game, and let's see, Lake Forest.
They had a lot of. I mean, they had some pretty lopsided wins. I mean, they beat Lawrence 52-26. They beat Knox 41-10.
So in Lake Forest versus Cornell, the game stopped showing in the box score in the third quarter because I believe it was a weather-related forfeit that occurred that they concluded it as a regulation game with the score being posted at 17-0, but not all quarters were played.
Oh, yeah, look at the box score. There's no fourth quarter. Holy crap.
So the conference is considering that to be only the quarters that got played, from what I understand right now. I don't know if that's where they're going to fall on this. We've been asking around, and that's the thought right now, that they're going to tell Lake Forest
They may not even have played the third quarter according to the box score. There's no plays at all.
It ended at halftime. So they're going to tell Lake Forest that because of something that was done out of safety, they get screwed in the tiebreaker possibly when it's versus Chicago and Monmouth if it lands there. So this is why Lake Forest needs to win their games, or their remaining games coming up here, because there is a very convoluted possibility coming up in a tiebreaker situation, and you don't want to be a part of that type of tiebreaker or that kind of controversy. Ask our good friends down Chicago, in the USA South how that goes.
Oh, yeah, and Chicago is getting an extra boost because they beat Washington U in the first week of the regular season. So that's a quality win against a regionally ranked opponent for them. Anyway. Interesting. Was WashU on the board? I think they were.
WashU is not on the board. I don't believe.
No, not on the board yet. But they could be next week. Yeah.
You can hear the firemen are getting excited over there about this fire whistle going off outside. Yep, exactly. We'll continue. It's live for a reason here, and we'll put our board back up here. Aurora versus Lakeland. Aurora needs to beat Lakeland because their tiebreaker, if we end up with three-way tiebreaker, is point differential with a max of cap of 21 points per game among the tied teams. So it is possible they could still remain tied with that. And guess what the next tiebreaker after that is?
Guys on the team with blue eyes? I don't know.
Might as well be. Coin toss.
Yeah. Oh, God. No, the dreaded coin toss.
You couldn't create another tie after the point differential scenario? Really, guys? Come on. Yeah.
Come on, man.
Region 6 in the MIAC will have a championship game that'll decide itself eventually. Northwest Conference, Linfield is one game away from clinching because they've beaten Whitworth already. SCIAC, Redlands is one game away from clinching because they beat Chapman already. WIAC, it's going to come down to the battle between Whitewater and La Crosse this weekend, is that?
Yes.
And in the UMAC, Greenville versus Minnesota Morris. There is a possibility for a three-way tie there, but Greenville... Well, if there's a possibility for a three-way tie, here's another little quirk. Martin Luther's game against Finlandia got canceled, most likely due to COVID. And so they could have 4-1, and these two teams could be at 5-1 in the conference. And who knows what the conference is going to do with that.
Yeah, hopefully it won't come to that. But I mean, it's funny that Greenville didn't even make the regional rankings because there's so many strong teams in this region. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, how conferences need to sort of take a look at themselves. We're going to the key Pool C races here. I blanked out. I did some editing here, JB, so kind of go with me here. Okay. Blanked out Region 1 because technically you can't say anybody is out right now. But if Salve Regina were to run the table and still not make the playoffs, which is possible, then Salve Regina could be at least on the board for the entire time. And again, if they can keep their strength of schedule numbers somewhere in a high position, ultimately, above 510, above 520, at least they'd be in the discussion if some carnage occurs. We keep it blank for now. In the Centennial Conference in Region 2, the runner-up, as long as they have one loss, would likely be in the discussion. The Liberty League, Ithaca, well, any runner-up with one loss will be in the discussion, but we think that Ithaca has the better resume of the grouping because Union's strength of schedule is lagging still, as we said, and RPI's is as well. And in the pack, you believe that WJ is the only team that would really show anything in terms of the resume to be chosen, but if Westminster were the team that were sitting there, it is technically possible that they would get a look because one of their losses was against Mount Union. But they're not being ranked currently, so it shows you that there's not much respect for them at this present time. We'll see where it goes. Region 3, Hardin-Simmons probably being looked at very highly right now because of a lack of teams with one loss out there that are quality one-loss runners-up. SAA runner-up, you got to look at as well, though, in Birmingham Southern and Trinity. But I believe that Hardin-Simmons will have to come off the board first before that lost team would get a look. You've got a blocker in Hardin-Simmons. You got to hope that they get picked early so that you're on the board for enough rounds there. In the OAC, Baldwin-Wallace seems to be the only team that's going to have a real consideration if they go 9-1 for now. In Region 5, Wheaton, same thing. Region 6, we believe that the runner-up of, that should read UWW, Wisconsin Whitewater versus La Crosse. Apologize for that mistake there. That runner-up will most likely be the de facto number 1 Pool C team from Region 6 and should be chosen. In the Northwest Conference, though, again, they need to hope that whoever that team is that we just talked about gets picked quickly so they get an opportunity on the board for a while because they may have a resume that's worthy of at least some real consideration, too. So Whitworth may be blocked like the SAA runner-up for a little while. Region 2 has the possibility to have the most depth, but possibly the least chance, believe it or not, for an early selection. Because you've got some very good teams, but I would say to you, you don't have what you would call that resume buster unless it's Ithaca sitting there at 9-1 with a win against Cortland and a win against Union ultimately.
Yeah, and that's why I think, like you said earlier, that W&J Carnegie Mellon game has some really huge national prominence. John Carroll Heidelberg as well, because the outcome of those two games are going to affect at least one of the Pool C picks ultimately when it's all said and done. So, right now I feel pretty comfortable saying that the WIAC runner-up is going to get one, the ASC runner-up is going to get one, the CCIW runner-up is going to get one, and if Baldwin-Wallace is 9-1 and the runner-up the OAC, we saw how many OAC teams were in the region rankings, they're going to get one too. That's 4 out of 5.
And if Ithaca is 9-1 over there, in a Pool C team, I don't see a better team resume-wise than Ithaca ultimately because of the wins against regionally ranked opponents that they would have if they were to go 9-1.
Unless it's a 9-1 Birmingham Southern team, they might, with a win over Huntington, and I don't know. We'd have to see.
Really, you'd have to have two teams that you beat that are regionally ranked. And if Ithaca were to beat Union and Cortland and still lose the conference, I mean, in your last 2 weeks, you beat 2 undefeated teams at that time. It's going to help you set the schedule first off. It would absolutely punch the ticket. Ithaca would probably be the first Pool C chosen if that were the case, to be honest with you. It would be the best resume of anybody out there, I believe, for a Pool C contender. So, again, and how that happens is Ithaca wins against Union, and then RPI beats Union in Week 11. RPI wins the tiebreaker in the Liberty League. Ithaca is sitting there, and if they've won in Cortland, sitting there at 9-1 overall and needing help in Pool C, but not too much help because we think they're a shoo-in if that's the case. Yeah. So that's what we have for you later on tonight, because we're going to let this one ride for a few hours since it's a little bit longer than we expected. We'll put out our Crunch Time show. So, stay tuned for that. But if you have any questions or thoughts, you know where to find us on Twitter. We'll answer them as we can. But this should give you an idea of what to root for weeks 10 and 11 and what games we're going to be watching in our Blitzer show on Saturday afternoon, starting at noon Eastern Time here in the Huddle. We'll definitely be interested to see how the CCC race is looking. That MASCAC race between Bridgewater State and Framingham State, I believe that is a kickoff during our window, I think 1 o'clock. Then the Liberty League race, both St. Lawrence RPI and Union Ithaca, because St. Lawrence could play spoiler. We don't know what George Marinopoulos' condition is after that knee injury. Yeah. And watch Crunch Time if you missed that, because we'll go over that a little bit. And the PAC race is going to have some real noise to it this weekend too. A bunch of other conferences throughout the country. Centennial Conference, that Susquehanna-Muhlenberg game, we're gonna watch that one for sure. So
huge game.
We've got probably, if I had to say, about 12 games to 13 games that are must-watch games, and that's why you're going to rely on us to sort of follow them, show you the best of the video moments for them, and then recap them as the day goes on. That's what the Blitzer Show is on Saturday. We'll see you later on today on Crunch Time, pre-recorded, and then on Friday for our preview show. Not much more previewing than we have to do except for predictions. Maybe we just drop a prediction show at this point, JB. But we'll have a short show on Friday, no less. Thanks, folks.